Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be talking about how my book habits have changed. Since I've been doing BookTube, and even just the years before that, my book habits have changed quite a lot. And I was reflecting on this a few weeks ago and I thought, you know what, it might be worth doing a video on this because I'm always curious about how other people's book habits have changed. And I think my book habits have changed quite a bit. So let's just jump in. I'm going to just talk about a couple of things, very casual. And yeah, I really hope this engages a conversation in the comments because like I said, I always find it interesting how people's reading tastes evolve and how they read also changes. So without further ado, let's talk about the first thing. So the first thing is how I actually consume my books. A few years ago, I would say even like 2 years ago, I would only read books in paperback form. And I'm specifically talking about fiction books. I've always listened to audiobooks when it comes to non-fiction, but as it specifically relates to fiction, I've only ever read in paperback up until about, I don't know, I'd say like a year ago even. And I don't know why. I think it's just I've always liked the idea of having something kind of physically in my hands. I also find it really hard to concentrate when I'm listening to an audiobook and like trying to keep plot points kind of in my head. I don't find it hard at all for non-fiction, but for fiction specifically, I find it really difficult for some reason. I also never touched ebooks. I would never ever touch an ebook. Even though I had the Kindle app on my iPad, I just never used it, even though I had books on there to read. Like I'd always just go get the paperback version and ultimately read that. But over the last year, I have been reading a lot more ebooks. I would say maybe 40% of what I read is now on ebook, maybe even more than that. But it's a non-trivial amount. And I've been much more accustomed to reading on ebook, which I'm really glad because one, I travel quite a bit and I like being able to take all my books around with me. And two, I am running out of space. So it's also nice having the option to be able to get something on ebook and it's not going to take up more shelf space. And so I've found it really nice to be able to have my Kindle on hand and take it with me wherever I go, because you also have like 1,000+ books in your hand. Like it's pretty incredible, right? I've actually found it sometimes to be favorable to read an ebook, especially when I have like a really chunky book. So as an example, I started reading Shogun by James Clavell in the paperback form. Now that's a really chunky book. It's like over 1,000 pages and it's like pretty, you know, it's a pretty hefty book, right? And I started reading it in paperback form, ended up switching to ebook, and it was so much better for me because one, I could properly highlight and take notes, which I don't really like doing in books in general, but also I wasn't lugging around this massive book with me wherever I was going. So, and I've noticed that more and more, especially with bigger books, I tend to prefer to read them on my Kindle. I also prefer to read books where I know I'm going to take notes on my Kindle too, because I just prefer the highlighting and note-taking feature that you have on Kindle. So I think that's probably one of my biggest changes, is actually just switching more to digital reading, because I never did that prior to a year ago. Like, it's crazy. The next thing I've changed my opinion on is special and limited editions. I used to be one of those people that every single time there was a special limited edition, I would buy it. Even if I hadn't read the book and I maybe liked the sound of it, I would still buy it because I thought, okay, great, I can just have that. And it's maybe going to incentivize me to read it more. And then maybe if there's a point in the future, I can resell it as well. Like it's going to hold its value. But I've changed my mind on that completely now. And I think I've only bought one special edition book recently. And by recently, I mean like in the last year, because it's a book that I just absolutely love and it's a favorite book of all time now. Going from like maybe buying 30, 40 special editions to maybe buying 1 or 2 special editions in a year now is, you know, it's quite a big change. And I think it's just because there's so many special editions now that it's kind of reduced the meaning of special edition. We get so many books, the same books get multiple limited editions, that it just reduces the impact of having a limited or special edition of that book. So I just don't really care anymore. I don't really care anymore. And that actually brings me on to my second one, which is that I used to love sprayed edges, but I don't anymore because it's so overdone. Before, sprayed edges used to be predominantly limited to limited and special editions, but now like there's just average books on the bookshelves that have sprayed edges. And I don't want to come across as like elitist or anything. I'm glad that people who can't necessarily afford limited or special editions can now have specific features that were normally reserved for those types of books. But at the same time, they were special because you didn't see it often. They were special because not everybody had it, not every single book had it. That's why when you buy something that is limited or special, it should feel limited or special. But when everything has the same feature, it reduces the feeling of it being limited, right? Like it kind of just completely negates the point of having something to be special or limited if everything then has it. It's just one of those things that I actually prefer not to have sprayed edges on my books anymore. I also am not one of those people that I generally show the sprayed edges on my shelves because I want to be able to see the book. Like I don't have that good of a memory for all my sprayed edges to remember which sprayed edge is which book. Like I don't really care either. So it doesn't really serve a purpose for me other than the fact that it's pretty, and I don't really care about that. I care more about what's in the book rather than what's on the spine. Another really big thing that I've been doing is that I've just been buying a lot less books. I think it's partly because of lack of space. I think it's also partly just because I'm in this mentality of like less is more, and buying for quality rather than volume is just kind of where I'm at in my life. I think when I was younger, I just wanted more of stuff. But as I've gotten older, I want less, but I want better quality. That's in every aspect of my life, not just books. I think the same thing goes for clothing. I think the same thing goes for the products that I buy, the tools that I buy, the technology that I buy. I'd rather buy better quality than buy crapper quality and buy more of it. Like I don't care. And to be fair, I've always felt that way as it relates to clothes. I've always preferred to buy very high quality clothing, but just buy less of it, rather than buy lots of like high street clothing. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, just to be very clear. But I think when you think about it in the context of how much waste you're producing, like I'd much rather just buy things that are made locally, that have better materials, rather than buying something that's 100% polyester but I can get 10 of it. Like I'd rather have one cashmere jumper than 10 polyester jumpers. Like it's not even like an argument in my mind, right? So I think it's the same with books. Like I think I'm also become very clear on what sorts of things I like in my books. I also do a lot more research now when I buy a book. So I tend to look for the things that I like, and then I'm just much more selective on what I actually buy. So I think that's great. I think it's always good to consume less, in my opinion, when it comes to this. Like, just focus on quality rather than volume. Another thing that I don't do anymore, and to be fair, I haven't done this in quite a while, is I don't get recommendations from social media. I don't get any recommendations from Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, most certainly not. YouTube as well, I don't really get recommendations. I have a few friends and a few people that I trust, like my patrons, and we all have fairly similar tastes, and if they recommend me a book, I'll check it out and I'll generally read it and generally have good experiences with it. But I just don't take recommendations from the internet anymore, because hype, I think, plays a really big role. And I think as well, reading is obviously so subjective that you can't base your opinion on what other people say. Like a really good example of that is the Greenbone Saga, which is such a beloved fantasy series. And yeah, it should have worked for me in theory, just because it had so many things that I like in my books, but it was just not good for me personally. A big part of the reason why I read that series is because everybody and their mother was shouting about it on YouTube. And I so regret reading it, because it was such a waste of my time. The point is that I now just get recommendations from a very small subset of people. And even then, I do a lot of the research myself and finding books myself, because I also like doing that. I like finding gems that other people haven't found, because there's nothing more satisfying than reading a book that nobody else knows about, and then you talk about it and you get people to read it. It's just really fun to be able to do that. That brings me on to not following hype. I think these two are very closely intertwined. I think hype has really burnt me quite a few times. Fourth Wing, Greenbone Saga, any kind of fantasy romance book. I think there's been a few other ones that I've definitely talked about on my channel, but for some reason my brain has just farted, so I can't list any off the top of my head. But I think it's really important to remember that hype is generated for a reason, and a lot of times that hype is manufactured. You know, companies, publishers, social media companies who help publishers are very good at manufacturing hype, and it's done for a very specific reason, right? Which is to get people to buy the book. So anytime I actually see hype now, I actually run in the other direction, because I know that a company is ultimately trying to sell me something. It's not necessarily about the quality of the content. It's more just about selling units, which I understand. They're a business, they have to do that. I get it. I have my own business. But I think the product also needs to speak for itself. And I think a lot of times with hyped books, the product is actually quite poor. And so it unfortunately creates this sense of dissonance with the hype, and that's why I just do not follow it anymore. Another thing that I've been doing a lot more of lately is selling and giving away books that I don't want or don't like or just don't think I will like. So, you know, in the past I've accrued quite a lot of books of things that maybe I like the sound of at the time, but because my reading tastes have changed, before I would have just kept them, like I would have just put them into storage, but now I either sell them or I give them away. I give my friends like first call over kind of what books I have, and sometimes to my patrons as well, and I just send them to them or give them to them. But other times I will also just sell books as well, because yeah, I might not get much for them, but it also is just a great way of giving back. I really like the concept of the circular economy, which is the idea that you buy something, but then you can sell that thing onto somebody else. So like, as an example, Vinted is a really good example of that. eBay is a really good example of that. Gumtree is another really good example of that in the UK. Craigslist, I guess, to some extent in the US. Like, you can sell pre-loved items and sell them onto somebody else who can then use that thing for whatever reason, right? So I really like that whole concept of like selling on things and giving it to somebody who's also going to read it or use it. And I've been doing a lot more of that. And I've also been buying more books secondhand too, because I don't think, you know, we need to be necessarily buying new books all the time, especially if the quality is really good, and the books tend to be much cheaper as well. I definitely implore people to explore that if they haven't. At least in the UK, we have quite a few different platforms that allow you to contribute to that and also to sell things, and you get to keep a lot of the money yourself. So yeah, it's just a great way to make a bit of pocket money. You can buy maybe more books for that if you want to, but the point is that you're not just getting rid of things and putting them into the bin. You're actually reusing them and giving a second life to them, which is really cool. The last thing about my book habits is that there are certain genres that have lost appeal to me, whilst others have gained appeal. So as an example, I never used to read horror, but now I read quite a bit of horror. I've been getting more into the genre, and I've been really liking what I've read so far. Not necessarily like straight up horror, but I've been dabbling into the genre and like horror adjacent as well. And I've been really loving it. Another example is I just don't really like fantasy romance anymore. It's just the same old garbage crap that's put out. And it's just not good. Like, it's not, if it was good, fair enough. But like, it's just poorly written trash that really should not be sitting on anybody's bookshelves. And it's honestly quite shameful of publishers that they are just putting out the same nonsense every single week. It's really quite upsetting to witness, to be honest. So certain genres have lost appeal while others have gained appeal, and it's quite interesting to see how that's changed, but also I'm really interested to see how that will continue to change in the coming years. So there we have it. There's a very quick list of how my book habits have changed. I'm very, very curious about how your book habits have changed. Let me know down below in the comments. I'm actually really excited to talk about this because I don't think it's something that we talk about a lot, and yet I feel like everybody's book habits change at one point or another, in some way or another. So yeah, I'll see you down below. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in my next one. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay safe, take care, and I will see you soon. Bye.